Hello everyone and welcome to the third in our autumn series of Cambridge University Press ELT webinars. I'm Alistair Horn from Cambridge University Press ELT and I'll be moderating today's session along with my colleagues Charlotte and Sarah, who are here to help with any queries you may have. Now, I'm really pleased to welcome as today's presenters JD Brown and Christine Coombe. JD is Professor of Second Language Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He's spoken and taught in many places ranging from Brazil to Venezuela. He's published numerous articles and book chapters on language testing, curriculum design, research methods, and connected speech. Christine Coombe has a PhD in foreign and second language education from the Ohio State University. She's currently on the English General Studies faculty of Dubai Men's College in the United Arab Emirates and has lived and taught in 4 countries and given training on diverse areas within the TESOL profession in 40 plus countries worldwide. So it's very much a multi-continental session we've got today. So I'm delighted to say over to you, Christine and JD.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Indeed it is. As I look through all the greetings that everyone has posted, I see we're truly a global community here. And it's thanks to technology and, of course, Cambridge University Press for organizing this webinar. JD and I are very happy to be here with you all today and here to talk about a topic that we both know and love, the idea of research literacy. For the past 2 years, we've been working on a co-edited volume entitled The Cambridge Guide to Research in Language Teaching and Learning, and a lot of what we're going to say is framed in that volume. So let's begin the discussions right now by getting some of your feedback. We have our own views about research in language teaching and learning, and those of you who went through the blog post that was posted earlier this week know a little bit about our views, but we would like to hear from you. So let's get a little discussion started on your specific definitions of research. Now, having said that, discussion of course means typing in the chat. So I'm going to give everybody a couple of minutes to type in some of their definitions of research. And then I'm going to pick and choose a couple of them to offer some feedback on. So over to you, participants. We're anxious to hear about your definitions of research. Good, we've got our first definitions there. From Rizwana, to explore new and uncovered information. From Patrick, to find out the unknown. From Anastasia, to study the teaching methods and how well they work. To find out, etc., about what's hot in ELT. From Keith. From Diana, small-scale classroom action research that can confirm or refute previously held hunches or beliefs. From Joke, wanting to know more about something. From Tian, checking on the effectiveness of teaching, students' learning styles and preferences. So as you can see, we've got a lot of views popping up on the screen and a lot of different views on how best to find the best teaching method of inquiry and the best definition of research. Let's go through just a couple of more before we move on to, let's see, classroom issues should be shared with other teachers to give better learning techniques, analyzing the applicability of changing trends, inductive and deductive methodologies. We got a couple of people who have come up with that one. Confirming what is known and what is not known, presumably about the profession. So a variety of different kinds of definitions of research. Now I'm going to turn over to my colleague JD, who is going to go through some of the definitions that he has found that exist in our profession. JD, your turn.
Thank you. Basically, I went through this same exercise many years ago, back in 1992, in a TESOL survey of well over 300 people in our profession. I asked them the question, what does research mean to you, or how would you define research? And I found that everybody had an interesting and probably very personal definition of what research means to them. But they listed a number of different types of definitions, and I think it's kind of interesting to look at that for a moment. For example, a number of the definitions that I found, and I see in fact in your list, uh, may actually be defining types of research. So you may be talking about statistical research, or you may be talking about qualitative research or conversational analysis. A lot of definitions of research tend to be about types of research. We also have definitions of research coming from teachers that are about the topics of research. And so you might see definitions on things like um, my classroom problems and how to solve them, or uh, language testing, or curriculum development, or those sorts of topical definitions of research. We also have definitions of research coming from teachers that have to do with the purpose of research. I see some of yours definitions are like that. So Mushofan, to find out the best teaching method. So that would be the purpose of research, and to analyze from Maruf Ali, to analyze the applicability of changing trends. Those are the sorts of definitions I mean by the purpose of research. And finally, definitions often come from teachers that are about the steps in the research process. And so these might be definitions that enumerate, first we do a literature review, and then we set up research questions, and then we gather data, and then we analyze the data, and so forth, step 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can see that not only do we have many different definitions, but the definitions tend to fall into these different categories. So consider, for instance, the types of research in a little bit more depth. So what is research in language teaching? And let's think about the types of research. Early in the 1980s, I was around. I've been in the field for many years. And in those days, in the 70s and 80s even, research in our field meant linguistic analysis, or case studies, or statistical studies. And that was just about it. We did linguistic analysis, case studies, or statistical studies. And you can see in my very first book that that's how I divided things up. But over the decades, things have changed considerably. There's been a vast increase in the variety of different types of research, and there have been new developments in all of the different types as well. So, for example, within quantitative research, we're seeing huge expansions in the kinds of analyses that we can do. We now do things like structural equation modeling, factor analysis on a regular basis. And so our options within the quantitative research type have expanded greatly as well. But in addition to that, qualitative research methods have grown largely as well. I mean, you have a wide variety, 15, 20 different kinds of, or strands of different kinds of qualitative research that are going on today. It's not just a unitary sort of thing. And so they're no longer limited to what I called a case study back in 1970 or 80. We have conversational analysis, corpus analysis, critical research, diary studies, discourse analysis, ethnographies, and so forth and so on. Yeah. But it's also true that in the last 10 years, in my experience, there's been the birth of a sort of new paradigm that's neither qualitative, not only qualitative, nor just quantitative, but rather is both in combination. And this is called mixed methods research. There are many studies in our field have appeared in the last 10 years that call themselves mixed methods research, but it's not really true that they are mixed methods research, because in many cases I find that they are really just multi-method research, because the people are not combining the qualitative and the quantitative research methods in such a way that they will reinforce each other, cross-validate each other, and so forth. So basically you can see that there's not only been a proliferation of options that we have here, but that we ought to think about applied linguistics research as a developing and something that we can adopt and adapt a wide variety of different quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods research types. Yeah, rather than seeing this as a problem for us in our book, We take it to be a way of empowering readers so that they can make fully informed choices about their own research interests, knowing their options.
I also wanted to add here, JD, that as editors, and our audience as well, as editors of this volume, we don't take any particular stance in our book on what type of research is the best type of research. We don't have a preference of one methodology or one data collection technique over another. Instead, all of the approaches found in the book provide what we feel are legitimate and useful research avenues that our readers may decide to follow either in their own reading and doing research, but also in their own research efforts. And certainly at times in the book there are chapters that might present opposing, overlapping, and even conflicting views and approaches. But as JD said, we view this as a way to empower readers so that they can make their own decisions about what type of research they would like to do. JD, it's back to you with looking at some of the proliferation of research options.
Yes, and so within all of this proliferation of research options, one of my goals has been to try to figure out what research is. I mean, how do we define research? You had good definitions, but what would be a definition that maybe could apply to all of our work? Yeah, and so I have talked with people, and I've read a lot, and I've looked into this issue, and I remember starting to get some ideas that were useful from my discussions with Donald Freeman back in the early 90s. And one day, while we were talking about what research was, he was a qualitative researcher and I was basically a quantitative researcher in those days, and we decided to look for a definition that we could both live with. And I remember him saying that research really is any principled inquiry. And I think that's not such a bad definition. Any principled inquiry. It's similar to what some of you wrote as well, yeah? But I find it just a little bit weak, and in fact in my 2004 article that's in the list of references, you'll find that I've updated that simple definition a little bit, and I would like to say that research basically is any systematic and principled inquiry in applied linguistics. So I've added the word systematic because to me research must not only be principled, but also should be orderly, should be methodical, should be precise, should be well organized, and all of those things are listed as synonyms for systematic in my computer's dictionary. So now we have a definition of research, any systematic and principled inquiry in applied linguistics. Let me turn it out now over to Christina.
Thanks, JD. So over the past, 15 minutes, we've given you some information about what people in research think about what research is. We've given you what we feel to be is a good definition of what we feel research is. Now we'd like to know how your definitions of research have changed in the last 15 minutes or so since this webinar has been taking place. So over to you, and I look forward to hearing some revised definitions in the chat box, please. Keeping in mind our definition, any systematic and principled inquiry in applied linguistics, from 2004 in JD's publication, but I think a definition that still holds true even today, despite the many changes that have existed in research. Okay, we've got some responses popping in. A couple of questions. Now those questions, we're not going to ignore them. Alistair's keeping track of those questions, and we're going to answer those at the end. So I hear some words that are being associated with new definitions of research. Words like concise, specific, systematic, measurable. Okay, Diana, to your question, the last word was any principled inquiry from JD's talk. Understanding, okay. The ability to relate to something, okay. Yes, Tian, you make a good point that different people within different stakeholders within the field of education might look at one issue or might look at research differently. Some of us might be consumers of research. Others might want to get out there and practice some action research to solve a problem that exists in our classrooms or in our working environment. Diana has included a possible topic that I think that might be good for a research study. Sangar Hamad, to change the view what teacher researchers had before. Okay. I'm hoping that some of the content that we've been talking about in this short session today will serve to change your views about research. We got a little bit of a longer definition from Donna. Thank you, Donna. Research can combine a number of research methods from both the quantitative and qualitative tradition. Yes, we totally agree. And in our book, JD is the author of that third type of methodological framework, mixed methods research. Thank you, Mohammed. The systematic procedures seeking for the best applicable practices for EFL learning and probably teaching as well. Okay, so lots of very different opinions out there. Diana, interesting question. Let's save that question for JD at the end, the difference between mixed and multi-methods in their application. I'll just wait a couple of more seconds for any other changed or revised definitions of research that might be coming in from our many participants around the world. All right. Thank you again, Diana. Doesn't have to be the end, but it's a process. We totally agree with that statement. Now, I think as more definitions keep popping in, let's turn now to basically the focus of our book, and that was, well, of course, our major goal was to help teachers become research literate, to demystify the process for many educators out there. In an earlier Cambridge University Press volume, in the same series I might add, which was about assessment, in the introduction, me and my co-editors focused on what we considered to be the skills that we thought were necessary in order to have a teacher that was assessment literate. And in our initial discussions while putting together this book, JD and I felt that perhaps looking at what skills were necessary for a teacher to become research literate would be the way that we would shape much of the content of this volume. So I'm going to turn back to JD, who's going to talk about the necessary skills that are needed for a teacher to become research literate. JD, back to you.
Thank you, Christine. When I first started thinking about this issue of research literacy, I was still very much locked into the statistical research mold. And in fact, I looked at sort of the background and skills needed to comprehend studies that are statistical in nature. And in those sorts of studies, you really need to understand the statistical language and the tools that are used by researchers in order to be completely numerate or statistically literate even as an adult in our society. It's also true that we need to understand the statistical reasoning that's involved in interpreting statistical evidence and the statistical thinking used by professional statisticians, including first, why certain research designs are used, second, why specific statistics are chosen, third, what assumptions underlie each of the statistics, and fourth, what limitations there are to the inferences that can be made from the statistics. But all of this is very much statistically oriented. I wanted in this discussion and in our book to broaden the idea of research and to broaden the idea of research literacy as well. So we looked at a number of other sources And we found that there are books on how to read educational research. You see Chance 2002 and so forth. Those are all listed in our reference list if you're interested in reading up on those sorts of things. And then there are also books on reading research in applied linguistics, one that I wrote and one by Graham Port. And those are useful too. They're also listed in our references. And then finally, we stumbled on a book on research literacy in education that covered research more broadly in the way that we sort of wanted to as well. In more depth then, according to Schenck and Brown, 2007, research literacy requires that you be able to talk and also that you be able to be skillful as a reader, recognize that research operates within an established set. Uh-oh, I've lost my screen.
We'll have that fixed in a moment, JD.
Okay, well, I've got no place to go from here.
Okay,
At any rate, the Brown and Schenck book turned out to be a very important influence on us. And I would recommend it if you're interested in pursuing these particular points as well.
Okay, it's just going to be a moment. It's just uploading right now. Apologies for that. And yes, we can still hear you, Christine, or yeah, we can still hear JD when he was talking. It's just going to be a moment. Apologies.
Great. Can you still hear me?
Yep, can still hear you.
Technology is wonderful.
So I'll just get this into the right slide.
Okay, and there we are. So yeah, it's necessary in order to be research literate to be skillful, to recognize that research operates with an established set of ideas. So regardless of which paradigm the research is in, the systematic nature of research is that it operates within a set of rules and set of ideas. And the third point is that it's necessary to understand how research is generated. So, where does it come from? Research ideas are lying around everywhere when I look, but other people look and they don't see ideas at all. So that's important to understand as well. And finally, it's important to realize that a research paper or the research paper or article is the way that we communicate research. That's the fundamental way that research is reported in education fields generally. So thinking about all of this, Christine and I worked out the skills that language teachers could probably benefit from having in terms of making themselves research literate. So think about these ideas. First, I think that language teachers need to understand what data gathering strategies can be used to collect dependable and valid information for research. And of course, that will be different depending on which paradigm and which type of research the person is working within. However, data gathering is the basis for it all. After all, we're talking about empirical research by definition, is based in the real world or in the data around us. But we mustn't have just a single view of what data can be. Data can be numbers. I like data that are numbers, but I also rely on very often data that are not numbers. So in quantitative research, we generate numbers and we analyze those numbers statistically. In qualitative research, we may be looking at data that are sort of like observations of classes or meetings with students or interviews with teachers, those sorts of data which are basically words and the analysis of words. And all of that can be done, whether numerical or oral or written, can be done dependably and validly, and it should be. It's also important to recognize well-formulated research questions when you see them, and to know how they differ for qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods research. For example, for qualitative research, a research question is more likely to be open-ended and ask, what are the issues that we need to address with regard to discipline in our classrooms. And so basically, they are questions that will lead the researcher to formulate hypotheses that ultimately could later be investigated in quantitative research, and the research questions then for quantitative research will tend to be hypothesis tests of some sort or another. So quantitative studies are designed differently, not to create hypotheses, but rather to test hypotheses. And so a quantitative research question might be something like, to what degree is there a significant difference between the gloss vocabulary method and the definition vocabulary method? And so those sorts of questions are probably familiar to you, and that's what we find in quantitative studies. Mixed method studies have a third kind of research question, and of course a mixed method study might include qualitative and quantitative research questions, but is likely to and probably should include several mixed methods research questions, which will pointedly look at the issue of how the qualitative and quantitative research reinforce each other. And so one question might be something like, to what degree do the qualitative data provide examples for the quantitative results that we find? That sort of question can be very useful and leads the researcher to think about how the qualitative and quantitative are working together to provide additional information beyond what either provides alone. The third skill that's necessary is to know how data can be analyzed in various research traditions in order to address such research questions adequately. So the moment I start thinking about each of those three different types of research questions, it's also important for me to be thinking about what kinds of data I will be able to gather to understand the questions, but also how to analyze the questions once I have the data. Fourth, we need to recognize sound research interpretations that are justified by the research results. And this is a very satisfying part of research literacy, one that people can develop simply by reading and thinking about research that they encounter. Yeah, your personal view of the interpretations of a study are important. They're important to you, but they're important to your thinking critically about the research interpretations as well. And I think in terms of the research interpretations being justified, it's crucial that you think as a consumer of research or as a researcher about the degree to which the statements that are being made, the conclusions that are being drawn from the research results are actually justified within what's shown in the study itself. Many times I see research that is very good up to a point, and then when they start to interpret the results, they wander off into the never land of saying things that they wish were true. The fifth skill is the need to understand the general differences between sound and unsound research and to read critically. And so if you're looking carefully at the interpretations under the fourth skill and how justified they are, that will help you to think about whether the research itself is sound. And that's the question you should be asking. Is this sound or unsound research? And that means to you, does it make sense? If it doesn't make sense, then it's not sound, and it's not being explained well enough. So those are two ways that you can think critically about a study. But you can also bring your life experience, your teaching experience, your reading of research elsewhere, all of your knowledge to bear to read research critically. Researchers are not demagogues. They're not all powerful. They're trying to communicate something with you, and you've got every right to read that communication critically. The fourth skill that research literacy really demands in our field, I think, is the ability to communicate effectively with others about the research results that you encounter. So, I mean, it's not just that you should absorb research, read research critically, but also communicate with others about that research, either with colleagues in the halls or in your office with other colleagues, or maybe at a conference or wherever. That ability to communicate effectively about research is also part of a research literacy skill set. And finally, I would say perhaps most importantly, is that it's important to be able to use the research and the research results that you encounter in order to maximize your effectiveness as a language teacher and to maximize the effectiveness of the learning of your students. So you can see that 1 through 7 there, we have a set of skills that are not beyond the reach of anybody and are certainly worth developing, I think, to make ourselves stronger language teaching professionals.
So now you know where we're coming from in the putting together of this new volume, The Cambridge Guide to Research in Language Teaching and Learning. In fact, this book is part of a series of Cambridge guides that focus on a lot of different topic areas within our field. For us, the goal of developing this book, putting it together, was to help readers become research literate. So we discuss our ideas, the ones we've just done today and others, in the introduction of this new volume, which covers in its table of contents 36 core areas of second language research in one volume, and we feel that in the process it offers up-to-date information from experts in the field about a wide variety of different types of research and different topics related to research. We feel that it does so in considerable depth, but without getting bogged down in some of the minutiae that might exist with regard to different research methods. Our audience for this book are a group of people or educators that we call students of research. And we define those students of research as pre-service or in-service language teachers who are interested in knowing more about research methods, as well as those studying for more advanced degrees like bachelor's, master's, or doctoral programs around the world. And in putting together this volume, we started with what our goals would be at its completion. I'm going to share the goals that guided the vision of this book. Our first was we wanted to provide a comprehensive overview of research methods in the field both of second language teaching and learning and TESOL. We wanted to give in-depth but yet easy to understand overviews of the many approaches that we included in the volume. We also wanted to focus on the theoretical background in some of the key issues associated with these topics. But yet, we wanted to mix the theory with practice. So a significant part of each of the chapters is practical advice on how teachers can improve their effectiveness in any research that they might wish to conduct. So basically, our main goal was to help teachers develop the basic knowledge and the research literacy skills they need to be not only critical consumers of research, but to be able to actually move into conducting their own research or engaging in their own fields of inquiry. We've included as well some suggested readings and resources that for teachers who have a particular interest in a topic, they can go and explore some of those resources and further readings. And finally, we wanted to provide a foundation for the discussion of issues that were involved in research in language teaching and learning. So we've asked chapter authors to consider the content of their chapters and write a few discussion questions that could be used in courses or in focus groups or whatever means they'd like to do. But then again, our goal was, of course, to strengthen our readers' assessment literacy.
So these are the references that we were citing throughout the talk, and I would suggest that you look through that list. You may find that, in fact, some of those might be worth pursuing as well, just by way of upgrading your own skills with regard to research literacy. You'll notice that there are a number of them by J.D. Brown. Sorry about that, but I've been studying this topic for quite a while, so I necessarily had to say it myself.
So we'd like to thank everybody for participating, and I'd like to say personally that this is a really interesting time in my professional life. The completion of this book is a very exciting thing for me. I know, JD, you've written so many books. Maybe this is not such an exciting thing for you as it is for me, but I'm excited to get feedback from readers once the book comes out. I think the publication date is October 8th or 9th. So I think now we still got a few minutes, so I'm hoping that Alistair, you have some good questions for us.
I do indeed, Christine. So quite a Interesting one from Kendi Ho to start off with. Can anyone do research?
Let me answer that one since I know Kendi. Yes, Kendi, indeed. I think that not only can anyone do research, but that pretty much everybody does, anybody who has a curious mind. If you watch a little child discovering the world, they're doing research from the very beginning. So I think it's a natural part of our development as human beings. Unfortunately, I suspect that the educational system drives a good deal of that out of us, and so some of us find ourselves having to relearn it. But yes, indeed, I think not only can anybody do research, but that teachers in particular should be doing research in their classrooms all the time.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Great, thanks. Question from Diana England, who asks how you manage your subjectivity as a researcher.
Well, again, let me jump in. That's a difficult question, and it's a good question, and it's an important question, one that we all have to think about. I think probably the most important realization for me was that subjectivity is a problem, not just in qualitative research, but also in quantitative research. And that was an interesting realization. The choices we make in research of any kind can shape what the results are likely to turn out to be. And I know that I have in the back of my mind realized that I was doing that sometimes in statistical studies. But then when I learned how to do qualitative research and mixed methods research, I began to understand how we can deal with this issue. And the first is, of course, to recognize what framework you're working in. What is your mindset when you come to the research project? It may even be helpful to write that down or to include it as a statement in the opening introduction to the study itself. But certainly to think about what is the frame of reference that you have in coming to the study. It's also important to think about what your biases are. I have recognized how my biases in some of my research studies have caused me to come to certain conclusions, and that's a really dangerous thing. And again, I would say it's important to not only recognize these biases, but probably to jot them down, maybe even confess them somewhere in the research study so that it will become part of the way people think about your interpretations of the results. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I agree that the type of methodology you choose to work under will serve to a certain extent to help you. But having said that, I mean, even the choice of the topics that we choose to research aren't necessarily subjective, because presumably we either have a positive or negative, feeling about those topics as well.
Okay, thanks. Got a question now from Lucy Blake.
This extends.
Sorry, JD, please go on.
Yeah, I was thinking, the idea that subjectivity within the research process is a problem is true, but Christina brings up a good point. It is, we choose to study certain things and other things we don't study. And maybe more to the point, or equally important, is the fact that we find results that we don't like and then we drop them. Yeah. And that's an interesting problem because, in fact, those results may be really, really important. And in a recent paper, I went back and looked at 12 of my studies, and I realized that over time, what's happened is that very often the most interesting things that have come out of my studies have been surprises, have been anomalies, have been mistakes that I made, or whatever. The results that I anticipated, yeah, I got those, but what I learned was these other things. And each of those then led to the next study. So I think it's really important that we not abandon results just because they're not what we expect, and that we be on the lookout for mistakes that we make and what we can learn from them.
Mm-hmm. And keeping in mind that in certain types of research reports that we write up, there's that section called limitations, and we can always talk about the potential biases or the subjectivity issue within that limitations section. And I see, JD, you have just answered a question that's now popping up into the chat box about what to do when you get results that aren't necessarily what you thought you'd get or what you wanted to get. So obviously you just can't drop results because they don't conveniently fit within your hypotheses for your study.
Okay, thanks. Got a question
And what
now.
I've ended up doing is following those down and trying to understand them, so that I indeed go on to the next study and learn more. They take me off into wonderful and interesting ways, different routes.
Okay, we've got a question now from Lucy Blakemore, who's also been quite active on Twitter as well as attending the session, so thanks very much, Lucy. Lucy asks whether there are better ways to communicate the kind of research you're talking about rather than the traditional research reports. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that I'm a firm believer. I'm a classroom teacher. I don't have a job where I have to do research as part of keeping my job, although my institution values any kind of professional publication or presentation that I do. My job doesn't depend on it. So I feel lucky in a way because when I do research, one of the goals that I'm trying to work on is if I do some research, whether it be large scale, small scale action research, or whether it just be a point of inquiry about something that I want to find out, I try to take it one step farther, present it, and also publish it in some way. And I think, a lot of times teachers, certainly teachers who are classroom based, have a hard time thinking about, publishing in those top tier journals. And even for me, they're a bit intimidating, but there are lots of other avenues to disseminate your research results. For example, there are blogs. There are lots of blogs out there that you can participate in and share results. Newsletters, for example, where the write-up that is required is not necessarily to the same standard of, let's say, a top-tier journal. And in many ways, I like targeting publications that go into the hands of teachers. And sadly enough, our top tier journals in the field don't necessarily get to the teacher population of which I try to serve in the research that I personally conduct. What do you think about this issue, JD?
Well, I agree 100%. And I was thinking back over the stuff that I've published over the years, and I would guess that something on the order of 20% of it is actually research papers in peer-reviewed journals and that kind of thing. That much of what I publish is in book chapters explaining research to teachers, or in even in book chapters where I'm responding to teacher research back and forth, or in newsletter articles and so forth. One of the nice things about getting to the full professor stage is that I don't have to worry. I can write what I want to write, and what I want to write is things that communicate with teachers. So I still do the empirical research, maybe 2 papers a year, but I'm very busy doing 6 to 8 papers on other topics that I hope communicate better with teachers.
Okay.
Okay, so a question now from Patharakorn, who says, how do you manage different theoretical differences in research paradigms when you're doing mixed method research, for instance, positivist and postmodernist viewpoints on research?
JD, I think that's definitely got your name on it.
Well, I'm have to tell you frankly, the way I manage it personally is that I don't have a postmodernist point of view. I've got a positivist point of view, and I recognize that as one of my biases and part of my framework as well when I'm doing qualitative research. So that I'm very concerned that indeed you have dependable data that are confirmable, and that they're credible, and that they're transferable, and there's a whole set of ideas that govern the structure and systematicity of qualitative research. But I think it's fair to say I'm a positivist with regard to that. And I would also add that positivism produces 99.9% of the research in the world today, if you look at all fields. So that's my view at any rate. But managing different points of view, the qualitative and the quantitative, is actually a delight, because you can sort of put on different hats as you look at your data, look at it from this perspective and then look at it from that perspective, and see what you can come up with that actually provides a third perspective, hopefully.
Thanks. Diana's just asked if you could say a little more about what a postmodernist viewpoint regarding research would be. I think you just mentioned that in the previous answer.
I think I would,
I honestly,
as JD said. Yeah?
no, go ahead, Christine.
Are we still? Well, as JD said, I too am a positivist, and as he said that the predominance of research comes from this paradigm, I really would have to Google postmodernist research perspectives. Sorry about that, Diana.
Yeah, I mean, I have colleagues who talk on this topic forever, and I don't understand what they're talking about very often. Yeah,
Mhm.
and the people that they're
So I
referring to
think,
are
so
not
I
people.
think JD, that's the way we deal with this kind of dilemma. We just focus on our own framework and to the exclusion of others.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, thanks. Question now from Felipe Alessandro Vieira, who says, should research always be based on a hypothesis hunch?
Well, I think that for quantitative research, a hypothesis is very important, in fact, essential, and that's where that's your starting point for research. But in qualitative research, my understanding is that you're not really supposed to have hypotheses. You're supposed to use grounded theory. That's where you look at the results of whether it be a focus group or interviews or whatever data collection technique you utilize. You look at what you get, and then the trends emerge from your data, and that's how you analyze your results. Now, with mixed methods research, I would assume that there would be, depending on what type of data collection technique you use, a hypothesis would be important. What do you think, JD, about this issue?
Yeah, I agree with you. The only difference in the mixed methods research would be that you sort of step back from both the qualitative and the quantitative data and look at them together as they interact to see if you can glean new information above that level. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a fair statement to say that qualitative research is hypothesis forming. Uh, Very often the end result of such qualitative research is that you come up with hypotheses, and that generally speaking, the quantitative research starts with a hypothesis and tests it. So the two actually go quite well together. And then if you step back and look at the data from above, sort of in a mixed methods frame of mind, then you can actually get further insights and interpretations.
Okay. I see Diana has posted a question, JD. What do you think, or is there a difference between mixed methods research and multi-methods research? Did you make a
Yeah,
distinction about that?
I did, and it's in the literature as well. I mean, because it's recognized that what some people do is that and I see this a lot in our field. Uh, People will have a questionnaire with Likert scale questions, and they'll calculate the means and standard deviations and so forth. And they'll also have observations, and they'll have a number of different quantitative and qualitative methods, but they're just thrown into the study without any thought. First of all, about how they could be structured to actually produce additional information, but there's no attempt afterwards to step back and look at how the data from the quantitative and the qualitative results can be cross-validating each other, or how they can be cross-exemplifying each other, or how they helps to expand our understanding of the other, and so forth. There are about 8 ways that I have outlined in my book on mixed methods research that looks at how you should approach this issue of making mixed methods research work for you. So the basic distinction is amongst mixed methods researchers is that multi-method research is just this hodgepodge of different methodologies without much thought. And it's usually said with a curled lip and a kind of snide attitude. And it's looked down on, generally speaking. So it's a negative view of that kind of research. Mixed methods research, of course, is much better because it has these other traits which help us to learn more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've got a question, an interesting question, I think, from Kendi Ho, who who asks, what other teacher researchers are there who you think are influencing language learning and teaching?
Wow, that's a huge question, and I think we'd be here all day if we were to name just a few. In terms of research, who do you think are the major players out there in the field, JD?
Well, I think a good place to start would be with the index from our book,
Yes, I
with the table of
agree.
contents,
Yes.
because there are a lot of the top names are there. So, I mean, name a type of research, and the researcher that's maybe best known for that research is probably there. Yeah.
Right, I agree. I agree.
Okay,
I
thanks.
see.
Question now. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No,
Go on,
no, go
Christine.
go go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say a question from Hamid Abu Goha, who says that it's easy to get confused with different points of view when you're starting your research and you're doing this sort of preparation for that. Do you have any advice on how to navigate your way through the different perspectives that you'll be coming across when you're planning your research?
Hmm. Well, I think if you look at the strengths that you bring into the research process, that's one way to start, because it's always good to capitalize on the strengths. For example, if you're good with numbers, then maybe you need to consider your start with a quantitative methodology, or like a true quantitative methodology where you have if you want to go mixed methods, with a minor qualitative component. If you have good social skills, data collection techniques like interviews and focus groups and things like that might be what you would need to start with. If you have access to a lot of potential participants in your research, then perhaps quantitative questionnaire, things like that. So I think that there are a lot of things that you can do a critical self-analysis of what characteristics you possess as a person, and you can use those characteristics to choose a methodology. You can also use, for example, I think an excellent way to do this would be to go through some of the sections of our book that are about types of research, because each of those chapters gives a very brief but yet in-depth view of what that research is and pretty much how to do it. That's another way to choose a type of research, if that's what the question was about.
Okay, thanks. Question from Karen Otsubai, who asks whether you've got any particular thoughts on research ethics and how that feeds into to all of this.
Well, I definitely think that research ethics are crucial, and we have two chapters in our volume on ethics, one on ethics proper and the other on human subjects review. So I think these are crucial to any kind of researcher going into the research process.
Excellent. Thanks.
Yeah,
Now, question. Oh, sorry, JD, please.
I mean, basically, if we just follow the golden rule, you can't go too far wrong. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Empathy is a really important characteristic of researchers. I mean, we've got to don't abuse your subjects, don't abuse the teacher's time, don't abuse the research process, and that really is a very simple set of rules. But I suspect that for a variety of legal and political reasons, the human subjects committees have sprouted up all over the world, but particularly in my university and other American universities, we've got this dilemma, a huge number of different processes that we now have to go through in order to be ethical. And I don't think that it was ever really a problem, because ultimately what we're applying for here is an exemption from all the ethics requirements, which is really odd. So I mean, I'm saying that good researchers should be ethical for sure, and that it's not all that difficult, but that our societies are making it more difficult for us than need be.
Okay, thanks. Good. I've taken us back a couple of slides because we've got a question from Diana England, asking whether point 7 on this slide about using research and research results to maximize the effectiveness of language teaching and learning. And she says, isn't that the whole point for research by and for teachers, that's what you need to be achieving? Would you agree?
I would agree.
Definitely.
100%. Yeah, and in fact, that's why it's highlighted by putting it at the end of the list. But that it's also true that the other 6 points lead up to that can contribute to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. A question of my own now, if that's okay. I'd like to ask you what was the most valuable or interesting thing you discovered while working on this book?
JD, I'll let you go first on that.
Well, the first thing that pops into my mind is that it was a delight to work with Christine. One of the things that I say in the blog is that we've got very different personalities, she and I, and she's much more social than I am, much more outgoing. I'm very much the introvert. And so we found ourselves actually contributing to the book in quite different ways that were always useful and complementary. I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm. I agree, JD. And I was kind of shy to send you that invite early on about working together because, as everyone on this list knows, JD has this godlike presence in the field of assessment and research. So it was such a pleasure to work with JD over the course of the last couple of years. And I was thrilled to discover that we think so much alike, but yet, as you mentioned, we're very, very different. And I hope that this is only the first of the many collaborations we'll have over the next few years.
Okay, thanks. Just try to fit in a couple more questions, hopefully, and please keep the questions coming in. We'll try to squeeze in a couple more. Question from Joki Varinga, who asks whether research should always be the start of something new. So maybe a new way of thinking or a new project.
Well, I think that now it depends on what type of research you're doing. It's always been my view that research at the doctoral level, one of the goals of one of the prerequisites of getting a doctorate is that you add something new to the knowledge base of the field. So in that respect, I think you need to look at aspects or issues that have not already been studied to add to the knowledge base. But I think other kinds of research don't necessarily have to be new. You might want to take a look at a study that's been conducted in a different context, for example, and do a replication study to find out if the results are the same in your particular context with your particular group of students. I think that's perfectly viable as research. And I think that basically, when I teach research methods to my undergraduate students here at Dubai Men's College, I really, in order to get them interested in doing research, I try to have them do research on a topic that they're interested in. I don't enforce different topics that I choose for them because I really feel that if you want to be a researcher, you have to first start researching topics that you yourself are interested in and want to find out about. What do you think? Do you agree, JD?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, there are a couple of thoughts that pop into my mind, and one is that very often I fear that the graduate student doing the MA thesis or the doctoral dissertation is doing their first, last, and only study. And so in those cases, it is certainly the case that they are doing something new, and probably that's it. But for professional researchers, people who get interested in research and do it for years and years and years, things flow one into the other. And strands start to develop so that I have 3 or 4 or 5 different strands of research that I'm doing, and one study leads to the next and so forth. So in those cases, nothing's new, and yet everything is contributing in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today, but thank you so much, Christine and JD, for a really interesting session, and thank you also to the audience for getting so involved and asking so many really interesting questions. Don't forget that JD and Christine's book is out very soon from Cambridge, and I'll just paste the link to that into the chat again. Don't forget also that you can find the bibliography in the link I've also just put into the chat, and that We don't have a webinar next week, but we'll be back in 2 weeks' time on Thursday, the 28th of September, when Vicky Saumel will be talking about digital tools in the young learner classroom. And we've got webinars most weeks. I think we've got maybe 2 the week after that, so there's a lot going on. So visit our events page to take a look at what's coming up. And either Sarah or Charlotte will type the link to and already has typed the link into the events page. It's wonderful working with Charlotte and Sarah because they anticipate what I'm going to say and actually do it before I've even said it, which is brilliant. So thank you very much, everybody. Thanks particularly Christine and JD, and have a very good day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Aloha.